Hi, I hope you enjoyed the first segment of the podcast series with Dr. Daquita Shade Johnson. This is part two. I hope you enjoy. I kind of wanted to also just touch on your experience as well as being a part of that Cherokee culture, um, shifting the focus a little bit. But when you hear the word Cherokee, what does it mean to you? Is it, I guess, a state of human existence or just a life? I know it's a lifestyle as well, but how would you describe it?
That's a really good question. And I think it means a lot of things to different people. And I think we're still sort of like defining it, and especially in the modern day, in the modern age when we're sort of so extracted from our communities as like global citizens, right? We sort of lose touch with some of those like traditional identity markers. But for me, what it means to be Cherokee is to belong to people and to a group of people, to a community, and to belong to a place. And so for me, it means the people to whom I belong and the people who belong to me, as well as my relationship and connection to our spaces and places that are significant.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, what was it like, I guess, growing up in a household with that culture, especially as a woman?
I kind of have a sort of unusual background. So I'm originally from Southern California. So I was born in Los Angeles County and lived there for my earlier years. And then I moved when I was in or not middle school, when I was in elementary school, to Oklahoma, where my father's family still lived and where my mother's family still had roots. I'm Cherokee. I've got Cherokee heritage on both my mother and father's side, um, as well as as well as Chinese heritage and a mixture of white heritages on both sides. So
Mhm.
I've kind of got like an unusual background as a multiracial person, as I'm sure you understand. And so I grew up kind of in a very mixed sort of like household dynamic. But I spent most of my time growing up here in Oklahoma, where I initially didn't really understand. I wasn't as connected to the culture. And so I sort of like had to find my way in through my family and the people and the things that we did. But one of the things that makes me feel most connected is through our food practices. And so that's one of the things that I've always been drawn to. Everybody eats, so we all have different food connections and food relationships and things like that. But for me, just sort of like going out with my grandparents to gather wild onions, going with my uncles to collect crawdads from the creek near our house, and things like that are the things that feel most like that make me feel like most connected to our ways and our practices. I grew up going to powwows, but not consistently. Like I didn't dance in powwows, and my family were one of the Christianized families, so we didn't necessarily do the traditional stop dance practices. So having my family had gone to boarding schools on both sides, so we were a little bit extracted from the ceremonial way of life too. Um, but we were also still very connected to our cultural daily practices. And so
Yeah.
those are the things that make me feel most um, tied to my Cherokee heritage.
It's wonderful to know that, like, I guess everything is kind of connected back to the environment and the food, and it's an I don't like it's a relationship. It's not just one sided between you and the culture and everything about it. Would you say that your experiences have changed over time as you've grown older?
Yeah, I think so. Part of it has to do with like just the ways that our cultures have changed and the
Hmm.
changing dynamics of just society in general.
Yeah.
But I think that we've been doing a lot of like reclamation work in our tribe, and so there is a big concerted effort to bring back our languages. And
Hmm.
so we see we have a cool thing here where in our town, which is the capital city of the Cherokee Nation. We have our street signs and things like that are all written in our Cherokee language. When I was growing
Wow.
up, the Bank of America had Cherokee language on the side of the building, which is so bizarre to think about outside of like this place,
Yeah.
right? And so I think for me, like seeing some of those shifts and some of those advancements over time and the
Mhm.
investment that we're making collectively as a tribe in working to recover and reclaim some of that knowledge is really impactful. And
Yeah.
it's really nice to think about my niece and nephew growing up maybe with more of a connection to the culture. They're going to Cherokee immersion school where they're learning everything in Cherokee language and not in English. So, like, that was a thing I never experienced. So, it's really heartening for me to see the ways that we're investing in our future while also honoring our past.
Yeah, that's great. Looking toward the future, but honoring the past as well. And it's great to hear that, younger people and children are able to, be more immersed in that experience and that culture. Because I think nowadays we're so far removed from our cultures, especially in the United States. But I'm
Right.
kind of wondering now, I'm curious, how would you say it was different from, specifically like older women growing up back then versus the children that you see now, like girls in particular?
Oh, I think that has to do, I think some of those changes are really tied to things like roles in society.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up, I'm let me sort of like frame this in a way that makes me not feel a million years old. So I'm an elder millennial, and so I grew up in a time like in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s were really my the time that I was really aware of the world, and so for me. I've noticed that there's been a big shift overall on a global scale towards feminism and towards um, sort of like thinking about how women can be empowered and can empower ourselves.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing that playing out in our tribe in a really interesting way. When I was growing up, I grew up in kind of another unusual way in that Wilma Mankiller was our chief. And so I grew up with one of the most famous Native women in the world
Hmm.
leading our tribe. And
Yeah.
that was a very cool and powerful thing. And I didn't realize how important that was until later, until I was grown. Um, what it meant for me to be able to see a Native woman in a position of power, meeting
Yeah.
with presidents, meeting with major players in the large
Amazing.
scale society, right? She was like BFFs with Gloria Steinem and, that kind of thing. And so having that sort of like presence in my life was really cool. I got to meet her a few times and my mom worked at the Cherokee Nation. And so we would go to all the different employee events. And so like she was always very kind and welcoming and was very cool to the kids and would always talk to us and things like that. So I had some really nice opportunities that are kind of unusual in that
Yeah.
way to see what power for Cherokee women or Native women look like and could look like. Um, at the same time, it was also a time when women were sort of like figuring out how to gain their power. It was like
Right.
a time when we were having a major shift. The Cherokee tribe was originally a matriarchal matrilineal tribe where the women um, had a lot of power in the ways that our tribe worked, in the ways that our everyday practices worked. They were the owners of the home and family. As matrilineal leaders, they were sort of where like the families came from.
Hmm.
And then during the assimilation process, the colonial forces implemented patriarchal culture and patrilineal connections and sort of erase those matrilineal powers. And so by the time that things like the removal happened and the time that the Cherokees were removed to Oklahoma, everything was already like measured and documented in a patrilineal way. Like the father's name was recorded for all the family registers and things like that, like as the primary head of household, when it normally would have been the mother traditionally. And so I saw sort of like emerging from that in a particular sort of way. And I think we still are. And I think we're still working to think through what it means to be an empowered Indigenous woman in the modern age.
Yeah. I know you mentioned a little bit about how, women had that role in the economic, family, and state and political matters as well. But what exactly, how did men contribute to the society as well? Did they kind of have their prominence in different aspects, or was it a shared effort, or how did that look previously?
Traditionally, it was more balanced. So women had a lot of power, much more power than we have now or that we can even imagine now, I think. But men also had their own power, their own roles. And we also had some mixtures of those things too, and some crossover. So I don't want to erase the complex and set us up in a binary that's kind of false. But traditionally, generally, women were the owners of the home, but men were the people that like provided for the home. So men were doing the hunting, and men were doing some of those sorts of things to keep the family alive. They were also mostly council leaders. Most of the leadership roles were men, but they were also highly informed by women. So they also had to answer to the women. So and women were allowed to like bring forth arguments and have say in our government systems, although men were also still holding leadership roles and still like in chief positions and things like that. So I think it was a very it was a balance, and I think there was probably some complications with it as there are with everything. But it's a nice thing to think about that it was a lot more equal, though different.
Yeah. I mean, you see, I guess nowadays, when you have a role or a position of power, you don't really want input from anyone else. You see that as, a way to dominate over other people, power that you can hold over them. So I guess it's beautiful to see that even though men did hold some positions of power, that position did not equal power over women. Women were able to give their input and their wisdom to kind of, I guess, have that conjoined effort and have both perspectives in the best interest of the society.
Yes.